as a young man, I liked to think of myself as an individual. I was quite taken with Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. Her book confirmed what I believed, that what I achieved in life was up to me, that if I was smart enough, determined enough, I could accomplish anything I set my mind to. And I didn't need anybody's help. I could do it all on my own. One day, later in life, I was asked a simple question. Tell me, just one important thing that you have accomplished in life, or that you believe you could accomplish, that you believe you did or could do entirely on your own, without help from anybody else. Just name one thing. I had no answer. And you know what? I don't think anybody else could answer that question either. Sure, I had things I was proud of. I'd graduated near the top of my class from law school. I'd become a partner in a successful urban law firm. With my own hands, I had built one home and had significantly remodeled several others. I'd also built a 47-foot commercial fishing vessel and for nearly a decade had successfully earned a living with it, fishing in southeast Alaska. I'd run for the U.S. Congress. I'd served as a campaign manager in the successful defense of a statewide ballot initiative. I'd served as a nonprofit executive and advocate. I'd written books and seen them published, both fiction and nonfiction. But there was not a significant thing, not one, that I had done in my entire life that I could have done without the help of others. A lot of help. Help that began the day I was born and that had continued throughout every single day of my life. Help from the people close to me, of course, from family, friends, teachers, and colleagues. But it didn't end there. I'd also had help from every person, now and in the distant past, who had, in an incalculable host of ways, made my life easier, my understanding of the world more complete, my tenure and success on earth even possible. It's probably not surprising that we humans, like me, are able to so easily convince ourselves that our success in life comes down to our own individual capabilities. Certainly, such a view is deeply empowering. It lets you feel that you don't need to depend on others. It also, given that we humans have so clearly dominated the planet Earth over all other creatures, and that it seems to be our intelligence, the power of our minds, that appears to be the most unique and defining characteristic that differentiates us from the rest of the animal kingdom, we can quite easily conclude that if intelligence is responsible for the success of our species, it must be that the smartest, most disciplined, and most capable individuals among us could surely take sole credit for their individual success as well. It only follows. Except, spoiler alert, it doesn't follow. And the reason it doesn't follow, and I realize this is counterintuitive, but the reason it doesn't follow is because intelligence alone turns out to be surprisingly unimpressive as a survival trait. When, however, intelligence is paired up with a successful, well-functioning society, then its impact can turn out to be astonishing. It's not all about intelligence. It's about intelligence and society. They have to work together. I'd like to tell you how I became convinced that that follows. Recently, in the course of writing a science fiction novel called Darwin's Dilemma, I found myself struggling to understand the likely point of view one might anticipate in some future artificial superintelligence, a being akin to the HAL that we all probably recall from Arthur C. Clarke and Stanley Kubrick's classic 1968 novel and movie, 2001: A Space Odyssey. Naturally, if we're to understand how a future artificial superintelligence might respond to the universe around it, the best, actually perhaps the only place to look, is at ourselves. We, after all, are the only fully self conscious, highly intelligent beings with which we have experience. And thus, we are the only known example that we have to draw upon. As we all know, human intelligence doubtless evolved as a biological survival trait. At first glance, it seems like it must have been an incredibly effective one. Consider our recent past. We humans went from a global population of about 500,000,000 to 8 billion today. That took us a mere 500 years or so. And since our intelligence would seem to be by far the most significant difference between us and all other creatures on Earth, with which we're in competition, by the way, surely that intelligence must account for our dramatic success. But take a second look at this population chart. It also poses questions. First among them seems to me, what took us so long? It turns out that we humans had actually acquired more or less our current level of cognition some 200,000 to 300,000 years ago, long before the more recent glacial period. This chart, as you can see, only goes back a mere 12,000 years. At this scale, to capture all those 200 to 300,000 years of history, the chart would need to be some 20 to 30 times wider. Picture that for a moment, and I think you begin to see the problem. If we're so smart, why did we only get around to the business of dominating the Earth a mere 500 years ago? Throughout the vast majority of those previous 200 to 300 millennia, we humans were hardly a blip on the Earth's evolutionary landscape. We had an average global population in the neighborhood over most of that time of somewhere in the range of 300,000 individuals or so, not the 8 billion we have today. We even approached extinction at least once. Meanwhile, of course, survival strategies employed by our much less intelligent biological competitors were very often far more effective. Consider creatures equipped, for example, with fangs or claws, with speed or wings or gills. Creatures that were bulky or who carried armor or who could camouflage themselves. Creatures that had abundant reproduction, could echolocate their prey, or had incredibly keen eyesight, hearing, or a sense of smell. We could name any of a host of other more immediate survival traits. Those creatures frequently put we humans to shame, whether you measure by species longevity, by geographic spread, by diversity, or by simple abundance. We humans, we just didn't stack up, not until very recently. So look now, right there, at that lower right-hand corner of this chart, and ask yourself this: what changed? There are, actually, a multitude of explanations typically offered for the social and technological explosions that occurred during the Chinese Song Dynasty and the European Renaissance following the 15th century ACE. Clearly, in both Asia and in Europe, this was a critical turning point in scientific, medical, and social technology. The change was so extraordinary, one has to ask, why did it happen just then? Why not much earlier? And why so suddenly, so dramatically? What pieces had come together that catalyzed such an astonishing and sustained explosion in our human population? a growth that has continued ever since. At the time, it began in around the 12th to 15th century, when there were about 500 million people on Earth. Today, by the way, we're adding 1 billion people every 11 years in what has to be the most massive planetary sustainability experiment of all time. Take another look at this population chart. One can clearly see that something was in the wind as far back as 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. Significantly, that was about when humans began developing pictographic writing. At that point, word of mouth was no longer the only way that information could be shared with others or passed down to future generations. Then, about 3,800 years ago, the first phonetic alphabet appeared as well. For the first time, oral language could be translated into writing by using a mere 20 to 30 easily memorized written symbols. By memorizing those few symbols, anyone who could speak could also easily learn to read and write. Soon there were scrolls, then there were books. But here's the thing. Books were massively expensive. In Europe, for example, it could take a team of writers literally a year to produce just a single volume. A book could cost as much as a modest home. Only the very wealthy or a few powerful institutions, like maybe a church or a teaching academy, could afford to own them. And those that could weren't likely to be handing them around to just anyone who might be interested in reading them. For some, books were actually seen as status symbols, as works of art, as treasured heirlooms, but not actually even intended to be read. The truly explosive revolution began when it did because it had finally become possible to mass produce the written word. With the introduction of the printing press, that's what changed everything. Printing appears to have begun in China in about the 7th or 8th century using wood cuttings and rubbings from engraved stone. It had a great deal of immediate impact, even though its scope may have been somewhat blunted by the largely pictographic written language in use at the time. But then in 1430, Johannes Gutenberg invented the movable type printing press in Europe. Significantly, Gutenberg's movable type took advantage of that simple, easy-to-learn phonetic alphabet, and it allowed for the printing of different pages from different books by merely arranging those same cast lead letters over and over again. This new printing technology made use of paper, which was by then available in both Europe and Asia, and it probably helped that Gutenberg's Christian Bible became the first international bestseller and very likely served as a powerful motivation for the masses to learn to read. With printed books, for the very first time in all of human history, observations, ideas, strategies for living, technologies of every kind could be reproduced by the thousands and quickly shared everywhere. We humans could finally, permanently, and accurately document complex ideas and experiences, and we could share those ideas with millions of others, with anyone who might be interested. That sharing could happen across geography in multiple languages. It could happen across cultures. It could be passed down forever to future generations in what became an increasingly massive, ongoing accumulation of our collective human experience. And it all coincided with that critical turning point in our human population. While the printing press was certainly not the only remarkable event taking place right at this time, it had to have had an incredible impact on everything else. I would argue that its appearance, just at this critical moment in human history, is a great deal more than mere coincidence. When Gutenberg Press started up in the mid-1400s, the total number of books in circulation in all of Europe could be counted in the thousands. A mere 50 years later, there were 9 million. That's 9 million books in a European population that was 1/10 of what it is today. The printing press had obviously become a mighty catalyst that took hold of the intellectual revolution already underway and that propelled it forward as a social and technological explosion everywhere on Earth. I might add that it was also an explosion not unlike the one that we're all observing today as we watch our collective human database being repeatedly deepened and re-empowered by modern electronics. So that still, however, leaves us wondering about the mechanism by which all this happened. What is it about the sharing of information, of life experience, that could be so empowering that it seems to have transformed human survival on Earth? I think the answer is that books contain data. And data is what makes intelligence useful. To understand why that may be, consider how it is that our intelligence actually works in practice as a survival trait. Ask yourself this: what is it about intelligence that actually helps us stay alive? In our interactions with the complex and dangerous world around us, we humans do engage in certain fairly obvious, sort of reliably observable behaviors. First of all, we observe our surroundings. Secondly, we struggle to contextualize and understand the significance of what we're seeing, especially insofar as it relates to our survival. And then third, based on that understanding, we design strategies that allow us to reach out and actually manipulate the world around us so as to maximize our advantages and protect ourselves from harm. That's how intelligence helps us survive. Those three activities, observation, purposeful comprehension, and strategic manipulation of our environment, are all decisively empowered by intelligence. They are how our intelligence functions in real life to help us survive and flourish. Significantly, our success in all three of those endeavors depends hugely upon the information, the data, that we can acquire about life experience. What we see, how we understand it, what we can do about it is data. And unfortunately, there is a very distinct limit on the amount of world experience of that data that any single one of us can ever hope to experience ourselves over the course of our own single, deeply constrained, and painfully brief lifetime. But that imitation can be overcome when we share. Prior to the printing press, the only truly detailed sharing of life experience, of data, that any of us humans could hope for was still through word of mouth. Information came to us via oral tradition. It came from family members or perhaps from a circle of friends and acquaintances within our tribe or community. Perhaps it sometimes came from fellow students or colleagues in professional guilds or trade groups. Sometimes it came from intellectual clergy, and sometimes it was even passed down as closely guarded secrets handed on by the fellow members of some exclusive elite. That was the only way it could happen before the printing press. After, however, The incredible sharing and democratization of knowledge that resulted from the printing press allowed any of us to tap into the experience of millions of others, whoever they were and wherever they may be. All we had to do was read their books. And that is why it seems so likely that the printing press would have served as a critical catalyst for most everything that happened in the years that followed. So, if you've ever been, as I once was, intrigued by the popular but I think deceptive notion that all human progress derives from the efforts of a few remarkable individuals, from people who somehow rise above the social order and who, just on their very own, without any help from others, have transformed our world, I'd say to you, think again. Despite what we'd like to believe, our extraordinary human evolutionary success does not appear to have been driven solely by our intelligence, nor was it driven by the brilliance of those amongst us who somehow transcended society and worked completely alone. It was not the product of our personal intellectual prowess. It was not, as Ayn Rand would have had us believe in Atlas Shrugged, a gift from some remarkable few amazing individuals acting alone and redirecting the course of history. No, our success was decidedly not the product of rugged individualism. Rather, humanity's remarkable success was very clearly driven by intelligence empowered by social interchange. If we want to survive as a species and to continue to thrive in the future, that conjunction of intelligence and society will be the mechanism that enables our success. That is the hope for the future of humanity. It is a hope that rests upon our ability to make that mechanism work. If you'd like to see a written version of this presentation, or if you'd like to see some of the annotations that I have assembled in completing the research which supports it, you might take a look at my website. It's at www.donstuart.net, www.donstuart.net. I also have two other related YouTube videos thus far in this series. One is entitled How We Humans Know Right from Wrong, Thank Darwin. And the other is How We Humans Know Who to Trust, Thank Darwin. Finally, if you found this video interesting, you might also enjoy reading my recent award-winning science fiction novel, Darwin's Dilemma, a story of humans, AIs, and the future of intelligence. It's available on Amazon, at Barnes & Noble, and in bookstores and libraries. Thank you so much for watching, and please subscribe to my YouTube channel, and I'll be sure to bring you more. Thanks.